So, Dave, you have a question?
Well, yes, Professor Lehmann. Earlier you pointed out that if people can't borrow, then they aren't going to be able to spend, and that led to the who's going to borrow, the federal government, and then that would increase spending. But a competing ideology would hold that you cut people's taxes, and that gives them more cash that they can therefore spend and get the economy moving again.
Did everyone hear the question? The question was about my comment on ideology earlier, and saying that, well, if the federal government has to do the job, and if we're saying that the federal government has to spend us out of the crisis because the private sector won't borrow and spend, then maybe some other folks feel that, well, the other way to do it would be for the federal government to cut taxes and then let the private sector spend. But that's really not a different ideology. Let me try to make the situation as clear as possible. That those folks who think that spending is the cause of the problem, they'd be happy with tax cuts to enable the private sector to spend, or an increase in federal spending, let the public sector spend. The idea being that if taxes are cut to let the private sector spend, federal spending is not cut. Or if the federal government spends more, the taxes are not raised so that the private sector can continue to spend. All that, both those kinds of views are really what has traditionally been called Keynesian views, named after the British economist John Maynard Keynes. And we'll get into that in a bit. Okay. The opposite view is called the supply side view. The supply side view rejects the notion that we can stimulate the economy by stimulating demand. The supply side view says the only thing that works is to stimulate supply. However, and ironically, the way we stimulate supply is by cutting taxes. However, the benefit of cutting taxes, looking at it from this particular point of view, the supply side view, is not that it's going to stimulate demand. Rather, cutting taxes will increase incentives to work harder and invest more and to be more of an entrepreneur, because you end up keeping more of your money because your taxes are cut, and therefore that will boost output. And more funds will be available because when you cut taxes, disposable income is up. And therefore, because more funds are available, there'll be more investment and more investment in new businesses and so forth. So the approach of the supply siders to the current recession is we should cut taxes and we should cut federal spending. There shouldn't be any increase in the deficit at all. Just cut taxes and, if necessary, cut federal spending, because that will stimulate entrepreneurs to create new businesses, and that'll pull us out. So, and that is a view generally associated, the view I just expressed, with Republicans and those on the ideological right in this country. The Keynesian view, which focuses on demand, spending, is generally associated with the Democrats and those on the ideological left. Does that, I hope that segregates the camps. In my own, now, full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I vote for Democrats. So, therefore, you can take whatever I say with a grain of salt. However, in my view, I think the supply side approach comes up wanting. And therefore, I'm approaching it from the Keynesian point of view, that we need to stimulate aggregate demand because it is total demand, aggregate demand, that has collapsed. And therefore, we need to resurrect it. And as a matter of fact, when we looked at these charts and we see spending on autos down, consumer credit down, people aren't borrowing, home sales down, all that is a question of spending.